Ahead and start the recording. So, welcome everyone. Appreciate you joining us today. Really happy to have whoever could be with us today. Hopefully you get a little bit out of this, get some ideas on costs and budget. So today we're actually discussing budget and cost management. And so I know this was called the ultimate guide, and I hope you find it to be that it's the ultimate guide for budget and cost management, or at least it gives you a few ideas. We've been discussing a lot in the last webinar, sort of how to structure capital projects. What are good approaches to structuring capital projects. We talked last time about kind of controlling scope and schedule on capital projects, and today, we're going to focus on the cost management side of capital projects. So have several ideas, concepts, and I want to share with you here. And so we're focusing in on, we start with the concept of the iron triangle, where, really when it comes down to capital projects, any project, scope, cost, and time are inextricably linked. And so we have to live with that link. And today, again, we're focusing on cost. So here's what I teach when I teach budget and cost management. I got three fundamental rules, and I hope people find these helpful. I think they've found them helpful in the past. And the first rule is that costs are not equal to budgets. Now, if you've been around capital projects much, you probably have heard those two words interchanged a lot. And the truth is they're very similar ideas, similar concepts, but they're really not the same. And so that's rule number one. Those two things are not equivalent. So the easiest way that I come up with to describe it is costs are determined by the project. So costs are what it takes to do any project. It's what your design services takes, what your easement acquisition takes, what your permitting, whatever, your final construction, alternates on construction, all of those things, those drive the cost. So that's why we say costs are determined by the project, whereas budgets are determined for the project. So budgets typically by a governing body, meaning that your governing body, your city council, your agency directors, whatever the case may be, they are deciding, hey, this project has $1 million for 2024 and $5 million for 2025. So they're determining what the budget is. Budgets are determined for the project, but as we know, cost may be above or below budget. So that's the easiest way that I find to help people think about it. And we'll come back to this concept. So again, one of the things I covered in the earlier webinars, which you can go to our YouTube channel, and I'll send the link out after or as part of the follow-up email. YouTube channel, you can watch those. Those are available online, those prior webinars. And we talked about the PMI approach, so Project Management Institute approach, which I think is a great model to use for project management. And I think there's a lot of application in the capital projects industry. So this is PMI's basic steps: estimate the cost, determine what the budget, and then try to control the cost, meaning control the cost against the budget, which we're always trying to do, right? So let's talk about just estimating real quick. I don't want to spend a lot of time. You all probably do a lot of estimates, what estimates, but you may not have thought about sort of estimate theory and where it comes from. So again, in the earlier webinars, I'm using this concept of building a house as, our sample project, because I think the idea of going out and having to build a house is a great way to think sort of through scope and schedule and cost and everything that goes into it. So imagine that we're building a house, right? So analogous estimate, those were the four different types of estimates. And I'm just going to talk about them briefly here. But an analogous estimate, I think Zillow is a perfect example of an analogous estimate, right? You're looking for a house that has 3 bedrooms and 2 baths and so many square feet, and it's on such and such sized lot. So that's an example, that's an analogy, right? So that's the way an analogous estimate works. We do this all the time, right? We had a pump station built. It was a 2 million gallon per day pump station, and it had a footprint of whatever, however many acres. And so we can extrapolate past projects. Past projects are analogous too. And that's a fast and easy way, right, to estimate costs. Then, of course, you have the bottom up estimate. Now, this would be more like probably what your architectural or design services engineers might do. It's where you're breaking down. So imagine if you were doing detailed drawings for something, you would figure out that, well, we have foundation drawings that need to be developed, exterior drawings that need to be developed. And so you would associate hours and costs with those, but you're building it basically all the components, you're building a bottom up estimate. Then you have the idea of 3-point estimating. And so 3-point is where you're not really sure. And so 3-point estimating is a great approach, actually, more even to scheduling, to where you could look at if you're trying to, estimate how long your permitting time may take. In this analogy, we're using building a house, right? Could take 2 months on a bad side. It could take 6 months. Maybe somewhere in the middle, it's about 3 months. And so you do I think this is also called the PERT estimate. And so that's another way of estimating. I'm sure you all have probably used this approach as well. And you can do this with detailed drawings and other approaches for, if you're estimating number of hours of how long something's going to take and the costs associated with that, right? So some consultant might do this. And then you have the parametric estimate, and that's probably one, especially on construction costs, that we're most familiar with, right? So if I, again, using my house as an example, if I had 400 cubic yards at $50 a cubic yard for my foundation, I have grading at roughly a third of an acre at 10,000 an acre, right? So that's actually what's called a parametric estimate. Okay, so that's all the different types of estimates. And really what you do is, and what we do all the time, right, in order to develop estimates for our projects, is that we use a combination of these. So in the beginning of a very early stage of a project, we might use an analogous estimate where we go and find similar projects. And then for services, we might use a bottom up, again, for that permitting or property approach. Property approach, well, it could be this as I'm trying to negotiate property. It could be this on the high end, this on the low end. And I can use that sort of PERT approach to that. And then again, for construction estimating, we're maybe going to use a parametric estimate. So all of those things together, right, that's going to add up to what our total project cost is as we're adding these things. Now, what is the one thing that is always true about estimating, right, or about estimates? And you could probably finish my sentence, because the one thing that's almost always true is that they're almost always wrong. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're closer to right than not, but many times they're never 100% accurate, right? Because they are in fact estimates. So the point is to to keep estimating over and over. And this is one thing that I emphasize with project managers. Not quite to that, but that's one thing that I emphasize with project managers, is that the whole point, because many times we feel like we give an estimate, right? So we've prepared this estimate for this construction cost for, this new roadway or whatever it is. And we feel like, because we've sort of put it out there in the universe now, that we can't be wrong. And so that's something that I like to always emphasize with project managers is, hey, there is the most likely scenario is that your estimates are going to be not 100% accurate. We try to get them as accurate as we can, but they're never going to be 100% accurate. So in a project system, what you want to do is you want to alleviate that hesitancy of people to change estimates, because you always want the best possible information. You want to know what is my estimate at completion? What are my costs? I may try to control costs against budget, and we're going to talk about that, but I know that estimates are not always going to be accurate. So we just want to keep, and again, you go back to one of the earlier webinars, we talked about progressive elaboration, and we want to keep progressively elaborating our estimates. Okay, so now costs can also have states, basically. And so an easy model, and again, we've sort of built InScope with this premise, is an easy model to think about is in terms of actual costs, committed costs, or contracted costs, whatever term fits there, and your encumbered is also another common term, and forecasted costs. So actual costs, that means dollars have left the building. You have paid someone, you've paid some vendor, or they're committed, meaning that you've entered into a promise to a contract with a particular vendor. So you've promised that they are going to leave the building. And then your forecasts are dollars that are anticipated to leave the building in the future. So it's a very simple model. Actual has left, committed is promised, forecast is anticipated in the future. And so, of course, the always question is, well, left with who or promised to who? And so that's going to be your vendor. That's where your vendor connection comes in. And that's where you're going to define the vendor and define the contract with the vendor. Now, the cost states, and then the way that you can model costs and then understand, and again, I'm only talking about costs here. I haven't got the budgets, only talking about costs. So imagine that we have a breakdown like this. I mean, we can consider that, okay, well, we have a limit. We've established a contract limit, maybe with a planning, design, and construction services contract. We have a $200,000 contract, so we have a $200,000 limit. Now, I may have paid out some of that, so I've paid out an actual amount of that, and then I have a little bit remaining. So I've paid out 150,000, let's say, that's roughly what this is. I have 200,000 in my contract, so I have 50,000 in this remaining category. So that's my committed or contracted, encumbered, however you want to think about that. But I I may know that I'm anticipating additional services. So I might forecast $50,000 more because I need them to do this extra survey, or I need them to, we're going to change the scope of the project, and we're actually going to, expand and put an addition on this lift station, or whatever the case may be. And so in that case, I'm going to forecast so that you can see your forecast compared to your remaining. That's always what you're sort of looking at, is the difference. I may have 50,000 remaining, but I'm anticipating $100,000 worth of services. Works the same way if I was looking at construction, right? Or site control might be exactly the same. I had planned on spending X amount on easements, and I've expended all of that, and that's finished now. So it's all actual. So, and then you aggregate all these things together. So I aggregate all my different types of costs together, and that gives me my project total then. And so this model works real simple for any project system. And thinking about, again, actual, committed, or remaining, in this case, we're sort of looking at the remnant of what's committed. And then compared to your forecast. And again, that forecast gives you the ability to go above or below. So again, that's what we're talking about when we think about costs. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the difference between cost and budget. And so budget is going to be the capacity. Again, remember, the budget is determined for the project. So imagine if we had a warehouse, right? So we have a warehouse, and that warehouse has so much capacity in order to, be filled with crates. And we can kind of consider the crates as analogous to our costs here. And so as we continue filling up the capacity of the warehouse, I mean, we may have a cap on it. So we've established that's our budget. That's how much we can go. But we always know where we're at cost wise as we're expending these things in comparison to our budget. And again, you can maybe forecasting, and if you're forecasting well, then you know that maybe I have 6 boxes coming in, which could exceed my capacity, sort of thing, right? Or you can kind of think about, budget is how much money you have in the bank, or it's maybe your credit limit. And as you're spending on your credit card, you may come close to the budget, but the costs are the expenditures being incurred. The budget is what your credit limit is, right? So just again, another way to talk about the difference. So again, the 3 rules: costs are not the same as budget, so you can help correct your team's terminology. And then costs are determined by the project, budgets are determined for the project. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about then what this looks like practicality. Then when we talk about a system, and we look at InScope as a CIP management system, and we use it to illustrate how these concepts work. So we have a project. We have project A here. Project A has a budget, has a CIP budget, a capital improvement program budget, which is spread out over, that's a time distributed budget, right? 100,000 in 24, 250 in 25, million in 2026, so on and so forth. And then as I have my costs coming in for my project, that's based on my project plan. So my costs coming in, that's what my project plan is telling me, that yeah, I'm going to be on budget for 2024. I'm actually, based on how expenditures are going to work out, I'm going to be a little bit lower than that in 25. So I got 50,000 left over, but I'm going to be back above on 26. And so again, of course, as you're doing a CIP, you might then adjust these numbers, to what your cost prediction is. But again, the point being that you're always wanting this cost line to be the latest and greatest information that you know about the project: scope, schedule, and costs. And if those three things are connected, then we know that we can get an idea where we stand related to budget. So you really only need 3 lines: the budget, the costs, and then you also want to know the variance, which is basically the difference. And if you have these 3 things, if you can pull these out of InScope or really any system, you can understand very easily where you stand budget-wise, how you're going to perform budget-wise. And then we're going to talk about the importance of that. So if cash is king, right, we've heard that term before. If cash is king, then cash flow, I would say, is queen, being that cash flow being what are your costs that are going to be incurred over time. Now, cash flow, right, is typically we think of that, well, that's for like a for-profit business. I mean, they're interested in to make sure that enough money is coming in, then that the money coming in covers the money that's going out, right? So that's typically what we think of as cash flow. So why would we, as sort of public agencies, cities, school districts, utilities, why would we care about cash flow? Well, we typically think of, we are interested in cash flow because we want to know when the money will be spent. And in particular, our finance departments want to know when the money is going to be spent. When are you going to use this budget? Because again, the budgets are determined for the projects by some leadership, city council or your board of directors. They want to know, well, when is that going to be spent? Nobody's happy about idle dollars sitting. And so that's why cash flow, again, I go back to that idea that cash flow is really king or queen, excuse me. So, cash is king and cash flow is queen. So the idea behind this is how can I get as accurate of cash flows as possible? Because if I can get more accurate cash flows, I know where I stand on my budget, then I know how much budget I have available. I might be able to do other things with that budget. And so we'll sort of see how this plays out here in a minute. So when I build a project plan, again, in my project plan, I'm interested in building out what are the costs that are going to be incurred for the various things. So here I got a pretty simple project plan. I'm going to turn off the details because we're really interested in just cost today. So I got my pre-design. Now I actually have that under contract. So I have a contract here because I have a limits area. So again, you see that structure of limits or committed costs, my actual I could turn on how much I have remaining as well, which is going to be the difference between my limit and my actual. So I've spent got a $50,000 contract. I've spent 10,000. I got $40,000 remaining. Not really too interested in that today though, because I'm really wanting to think about the forecast because I'm forecasting future costs. I got some costs that are contracted, but I also have future costs for design services and construction services, and I also have a construction estimate here. So these are all my cost forecasts, and that's what I've done here. I've gone to my forecast and I've added estimates, and I've sort of built out, this is my plan for what I plan. These are the things I plan on spending money on in the future. These are my anticipated costs. I come over, so then what I want to do is, as I'm building out a project plan, I build a project schedule. And so I come over to my Gantt chart and I build out my schedule and I say obviously I have to procure the services and that's going to take some time. And then I have a study that has to be done and, maybe that's going to push out a little bit longer. And so I, massage my dates, right? I'm always keeping my schedule up to date. Well, these things are exactly what I've connected my costs to. So as I'm making updates to my schedule, then if I come over here to my cash flow, then I'm seeing exactly, okay, these are what my cash flows look like. This is what my costs over time. This is what I'm going to be incurring costs over time. So now when I go to budgets, what I want to do is I want to come over here to my budgets workspace. And if I look at my budgets workspace, I can then see, so I forget what project I was looking at, ST2412 here. So I can see that ST2412, I had 100,000 this year. Well, I'm actually looking to be a little bit north of that, based on when things are going to come in. And that's okay. I mean, at least I know that, I can sort of see that. So maybe I am going to get these design services under contract sooner than I anticipated. And so maybe I do need a budget adjustment. And if I was going to do a budget adjustment, at least in InScope, the way I would do it, I would click this and I would click a new adjustment. And I'm going to move money from one project to another, perhaps, right? So and this is a very simple example, so I don't have any other projects here, but I could look through and maybe possibly identify, well, projects are available, have money available that I can move from. And then I also I can see what my next year looks like, again, in comparison to my CIP. Now, overall, I'm looking okay, but I actually am looking to have a little bit of overrun. So for some reason, my costs are predicting trending higher than my budget is. But I can see that. And the point is that I have that information. But you could also have the opposite situation, right? Here, this is not a very dramatic example, but in this project right here, this SC 2412, I have a little bit of surplus. Well, imagine that SC 2412, I'm going to go to that project real quick. Imagine the SC 2412 hit a pretty major delay. That project's not going to happen for an entire year. So I'm actually going to move this out to July 2025. And so if I do that, if I make that adjustment, I'm going to, that's going to shift my project schedule. And as a result, that's going to shift my cash flow, right? So now my cash flow is not being incurred until 2025 now, because that's when it's going to begin, because I hit this major delay. And obviously that could happen with any stage of the project. The point being that now if I see that in my budget, and I can't remember what my budget was in that project, roughly 70,000, but imagine that that was $1 million. Imagine that this was a giant construction contract, right? And I had to shift this construction contract, or even that this got delayed and pushed out another year. I mean, that's $3 million. Now, all of a sudden, I had $3 million budgeted, and now I can't put that to work this year. And again, that's where those idle CIP dollars, and we know that that happens to us all the time. But the point is, when this is easy to happen, and you saw how easily that was understood just by managing the schedule, by managing, again, the costs that I had allocated, and everything is tied together, I can see exactly when that happens. The question becomes, well, what can I do? What can I do with that money? I can put that money to work doing another project, perhaps. So I could get maybe 2 more designs started for that. But if I never see that, if I never have knowledge, and I'm not keeping up with my schedules, and I'm not forecasting, adjusting my estimates, changing my estimates up or down, then I never have that knowledge, and I never have that information as a program manager, or even as a public official, as an elected official. Now, there's a friction point here, and the friction point comes in because imagine, you have this $5 million contract, right? Well, our finance departments, God love them, how they typically look at it is, well, you got a $5 million contract, that's a $5 million encumbrance. And so they budget it all, right? That's the line is, we're going to budget it all. You got a $5 million contract. We're going to, even though it's going to take me a while to expend out those dollars, they're going to put that $5 million in the budget. They're going to want to put that $5 million in the budget. But again, if you take this, and this takes a little bit of internal selling, right? I mean, you have to be able to sell this idea internally of budgeting around cash flow, and it's a give and take, because they have to be able to trust you as a program manager or and teams of project managers, that you can give them accurate cash flows, and then you have to be able to trust them that they're going to budget accordingly. Now, of course, I know that you run into, of course, even from legal or other city attorneys. I mean, again, God love them. They love to say, well, we can't commit future budgets. But there's usually a way around that. One of my favorite clauses in contracts is subject to appropriation, and that lovely little clause often allows you to budget based on future budgets. Obviously, there has to be some financial controls in place, but the whole point is, if you can sell your finance departments on an approach like this, to where you budget around cash flow and you get better at predicting cash flow or costs over time, then you get better pictures of when budgets are actually going to be utilized. And then if I have a surplus in my budget, then I know, and I have a better idea that, okay, well, maybe I can get more initiatives started. Now, what initiatives should you start? What are the right projects to feed in? Well, we're going to talk about that in an upcoming webinar when we talk about, prioritizing projects. But that's where, that's where the real benefit of this approach can come in. And again, it takes some building with your finance departments to convince them potentially. Some of you may budget this way, some they try to budget on what will actually be expended. But many times I see it coming in where the finance departments are leery about if you got $5 million contract, they want to budget that entire amount, even though it's not going to be spent out over time. Now, I want to take a quick note because I did, and I only got a few minutes left here, but I want to talk about, okay, well, integrating with our finance departments. I mean, that's a fundamental piece. And the truth is that, our finance departments are looking at things obviously from a dollars and cents standpoint. We're looking at things from a project management standpoint, and there are some differences in those approaches. And so when we get to the point that we want to be able to integrate project systems with finance systems, there's just a few things to keep in mind. And really, one of the biggest things is, as you're thinking about, if you're thinking about integrating with your ERP system, you have to decide, well, who's going to initiate? Is the project system going to initiate things, records like contracts, invoices, budgets? Are they going to initiate those things, or is finance going to initiate those things? Now, almost always finance wants to initiate those things, and we'll talk about what some of the benefit of not taking that approach is. But when you have these are typically what you're going to integrate, right? Approved annual budgets. And many times the ERP systems also don't have the ability, or they don't do it well on having multi-year budgets. So your CIP often doesn't even exist in an ERP system. So I always say annual budgets. And then vendors and details about vendors. Again, I think that should always come from the finance system because it makes it life easier. Contract encumbrance, what the originating balance is, where does that initiate from? Any changes to that balance, change orders, supplemental agreements, actual expenditures, and then you're also going to have one-off purchases, right? So these are the basics when you're trying to integrate with other systems. These are really the basics. And here's why I think it's better, and this is just Kevin's opinion, but this is why I think it's better if the project system initiates, because the details matter more to the project. Typically, does the finance department really care that you have, this $100,000 contract with a design firm? Do they really need to know? Are they really going to track? Are they really going to code, everything that you're going to do, all the little tasks, scope elements that you're going to do? Typically not. And so the details matter more to the project. And the totals, if you can convince them just to send the totals, it also allows the project managers, it keeps the project managers engaged because it allows them to preview and or experiment with where they stand on the project. Again, changing estimates. And then it also allows the project system to establish the coding, meaning that the project system drives, maybe what the contract ID is, what the encumbrance ID is. And so and the benefit of that is when it goes into the finance system, now that code is already there, because if you initiate out of the finance system, the coding somehow has to get sent back to the project system in some sort of way, meaning that it also creates the record, which also limits your ability to create records like those forecasts or estimates that we saw for future. And so you're always relying on the finance system. So again, you can drive the coding. Obviously, the coding between the two systems needs to match in terms of your GL code breakdown, but you can make those things match up. And now your coding can drive into your finance system, which means that your records in your finance system are now always automatically connected. And the last is that it ensures your project managers, it ensures that they are going to, if they have to initiate out of a project system, well, now you have some built-in accountability that they have to go in and they have to update their project. So that's, again, just my 2 cents on when you go and try to integrate your project systems with your finance systems. And hopefully that provides you some benefit. So that's, I know we covered a lot in a short amount of time, but I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I appreciate you joining us today. And if you are, I also wanted to share, if you are facing an integration, I've done a number of integrations now in my consulting work, SAP, Munis, Abila, so some of the most common systems out there. And if you just want to reach out, feel free to reach out to me, Kevin at getinscope.com. I am more than happy to, just share ideas, spitball things with you on, what's the best way to go about it. It's sort of no matter what system you're using. I just wanted to put that out there that I am more than happy to just lend a hand if I can be of help, because I have done a number of these types of integrations and cost management integrations in the past. So once again, thanks for joining, and everybody have a great day.